Tim Farron joins me now from Kendal. Welcome to the programme, Mr. Farron.
Morning, Andrew.
Good morning. Since 2010, you have lost 49 MPs, 10 MEPs, 11 MSPs, 2,134 councillors. Is that as bad as it gets, or could it get even worse in next year's local and devolved parliament elections?
Well, it better had be as bad as it gets. I mean, I think when we went into coalition in 2010, I think we did the right thing by the country, but I think we did a damaging thing to the party. I still think we did the right thing, but as some of the folks at the Barnet new members spoke about, they talked about tuition fees and the lack of trust, and that led indeed to a series of defeats for us that sadly were inevitable. I would say now the last, 4 weeks have shown how essential liberalism is in this country, as David Cameron presses on with threats to human rights, to internet surveillance, to the cuts in housing benefit for young people, the sell-off of housing association properties. You see why we need a Liberal Party. So I think the survival of our movement is absolutely essential, but as you have set out, it is not inevitable. And so my job is to make sure that we build from the grassroots up and give a very clear message as to why Britain needs that Liberal vision, that Liberal voice.
Okay.
And so we build up from the local elections, so the Scottish and Welsh and London elections next year, and become a force once again.
We haven't got much time, so I'm just pushing you along a little bit, Mr. Farron. I mean, you said a series of defeats. It was really a case study in electoral collapse. Can I suggest it will be a long time before you'd risk coalition again? Am I right?
Well, I think that a revival for the Liberal Democrats, it wouldn't be the first time that it's happened to our party under Paddy Ashdown, David Steele, Joe Grimmond, some of whom had fewer MPs than I would have if I became our party leader. Those revivals were never inevitable, but they happened, and they happened rather quickly. You look at David Steele, who took over after the Thorpe scandal. It took him only 7 years to go from that nadir.
But would you risk coalition again in the foreseeable future?
Well, if you want to... I mean, if you stand for election, you should want to be in power. But I think we would need to show a level of wisdom and awareness going into any deal in the future, which would mean that we couldn't possibly go in without a guarantee of electoral reform delivered within the first year of that parliament. I think undoubtedly it was in Britain's interest we went into coalition last time round, but I would say that in future what is in Britain's interest is the survival of this Liberal Party, and I'm not going to put that party at risk by any unwise deals in the future. But the first thing we have to do is to build back up from the grassroots, give people inspiration and belief that our movement is worth backing, as 17,000 new people have in the last 4 weeks.
Well, mind you, almost all of the losers have seen a rise in their membership. You're not alone in that. So have the Greens, so has the Labour Party, and so on. You've all had an increase. You can maybe boast of more, but let me ask you this.
Much greater.
If you're a leader, would you rule out another coalition with the Tories?
Oh, you don't rule out any coalition. If you stand for election, you should want to get into power. I didn't join the Liberal Democrats as a fast track to power, you'll be pleased to hear, but neither did I join as a cop-out. I want to be involved in power. I want to help to run this country. I want us to be in a position to stop the abuse to our human rights legislation, to prevent these 12 billion cuts in welfare, to protect our housing association stock. I don't want to be sat on the sidelines. I'm fed up of being right and losing. I want to make sure we win and get at the heart of it, but we have to be wise and wily when we deal with other parties, and I fear perhaps at the beginning in 2010 we weren't.
You used to be the Lib Dems, you used to be the only mainstream party of protest, but there are plenty of party of protests around now. The Greens, UKIP is a party of protest, the Welsh Nationalists, even the SNP is a kind of anti-Westminster protest. I mean, you've lost your unique selling point. Maybe there's no point to you anymore.
What you set out a clear fact, which is that the landscape is not clear for us. As I said to you before, the survival of our Liberal voice, of the Liberal Democrat, is absolutely essential for decent progressive politics in this country, but it isn't inevitable. We haven't to assume that the pendulum will swing back to us, because it won't unless we go out there and make our own luck. And, you know, I'm standing here in Kendal, in Westmoreland, the only place in the entire United Kingdom where the Liberal Democrats got more than 50% of the vote on election day, where we have a majority Liberal Democrat council here here. And we can do across the country what we have done here to buck the trend by serving people. If you're a Liberal and you believe in individuals, then you serve them in the community in which you live and in which you work. And that's what I want. I want a rebirth of community politics up and down the country so that we rebuild from local government, we go forward in the Welsh parliamentary election, the Scottish parliamentary election next year.
You've mentioned that. You've mentioned these elections before. Let me put this point to you. Aren't you much more of a social democrat than you're much more of a social democrat than a classic Liberal, aren't you?
Well, I was a member of the Liberal Party and not the Social Democratic Party. But when well, 2 years later, when I was 18 and the two parties merged, I was enthusiastically in favour of merger with the SDP. I'm a Liberal. I'm a classic British Liberal.
Are you a Liberal in the modern sense? Because you voted against the Sexual Orientation Equality Act in 2007. You abstained from the third reading of the same-sex marriage bill. You abstained from a 2011 bill to restrict abortion providers from providing counsel. There's nothing very liberal about that.
I think very liberal about being, I mean, for example, just to clarify, I voted in favour of equal marriage. I also voted to challenge the legislation.
You didn't vote on the
one
third
hand
reading
because of conscience issues. I'm just explaining that. On the one hand on conscience issues, and on the other hand because equal marriage was not equal enough. It did not extend properly to people who are transgender. And if Liberals can't ask questions like that, then who will?
Well, why did you vote against the Equality Act on sexual orientation in 2007?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm in favour of that act. I was also, however, challenging, as many other Liberals did, and by the way, Peter Tatchell was on the same side as me, and many others were as well.
Why you voted against it.
Who thought that it is right that you stand up in favour of protecting minority rights in these circumstances. But I'm absolutely clear that I am undoubtedly and absolutely committed to equality for LGBT plus people. That's why, for example, I believe in extending equal marriage to make sure that transgender people are properly covered. It's an outrage. There is something called the spousal veto, which means people who are transgender do not. No. If you, Andrew, if you listened at the time, you will know that that was the case I made at the time. That is why I voted the way I did. And I think as Liberals, we have to challenge these positions. We have to say, if we want equal marriage, it's not good enough to say we only extend it to people who are lesbian and gay. What about people who are transgender? What about making sure we have real equal marriage? Liberals are there to stand up for the powerless and those people who are least able to speak for themselves. And in that legislation, I felt it did not go far enough. As I say, if Liberals can't stand up for those people who are, shall we say, outside and who are not having the same rights as we have, then who will? I think you're rewriting history here.
In 2007, you weren't saying that you were voting against the Equality Act because it didn't go far enough.
Oh, yes, I did. I mean, I was very, very clear that what we were not doing at that point was recognising the rights of individual minorities of all kind. Remember that at the same time, in fact, I think probably the same week as that, I was one of those who proposed the abolition of the blasphemy laws, because I believe as a Liberal we should have the right to offend and the duty to accept offence. We had the discussion over the tragedy at Charlie Hebdo a few months ago, which brought into sharp relief that in a true liberal society, tolerance means standing up for those people who sometimes you don't agree with, and that can mean religious minorities, political minorities, as well as people of all different kinds. And we need to remember, as Liberals,
you voted for tougher laws on abortion too, didn't you?
No, I voted to maintain the current law on abortion.
No, you voted for tougher term limits. In
no,
2006, you voted for tougher. In 2006, you voted for tougher term limits on abortion.
Andrew, I'm in favour of the current law on abortion, and that's a very clear thing
but
on the record.
But in 2006, you voted for tougher term laws on abortion.
I'm in favour of the current law on abortion. I mean, it's a peculiar line of questioning, and I think what we need to understand, I think, is that this is a party, a Liberal party, that believes in standing up for those people who are the most powerless in our society.
All right, let me ask you one more question.
It's about people are LGBT+.
No, you've made that point. I'm sorry to rush you, but we are very short of time. I just want to ask one more question about your leadership qualities. Paddy Ashdown, serious people in your party. Paddy Ashdown says that judgment is not your strong suit. Vince Cable says you have never had to take difficult decisions and you lack credibility. These are your own people. What do you say?
Well, my judgment is the only way back for the Liberal Democrats is to build up from the grassroots and to make sure that we win again.
No, but what do you say to them that you haven't got leadership capabilities?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think they're both great men. And they're listening now. They're listening to the only Liberal Democrat in the United Kingdom who got more than half the vote. My judgment is pretty clear. And if you want this party to survive, and winning and survival is all that matters if Britain's Liberal Party is going to survive, then I hope people will put their trust in me.
Thank you, Tim Farron. I hope we get a chance to talk again in perhaps more relaxed circumstances before the vote takes place. Tim Farron from his constituency.